I'm reminded of a story I heard once. It says a minister and his wife were on their way home on a Sunday evening. And he was tired because he had preached 5 times that day. And his wife asked him some question, and he answered her back with anger. And immediately he felt convicted and apologized to his wife. And he said, "Forgive me, I'm quite tired. I preached 5 times today." And his wife said, "Yes, dear, I know, but I've had to listen to it 5 times. I'm only going to preach this one 3 times. So my brother back here, he said, have to hear that, Father." Jesus says in the Gospel of John, "I came from the Father and entered the world, and now I am leaving the world and going back to the Father." And now for the rest of the story. We are fortunate to be here today to celebrate the feast of Christ the King, an observance of the sovereignty of Jesus Christ, giving us an opportunity to reflect and rejoice in the good news of the gospel and of the eternal plan of God. In the Gospel of Luke, an angel comes to Mary and says that she would conceive and bear a child. It says that the Lord would give this child the throne of his father David, and that he would reign over Jacob's descendants forever, and that his kingdom would have no end. Jesus is referred to as the King of the Jews during his earthly life. Remember, the 3 wise men come to King Herod and ask him about the king so that they could go and worship this king. And later on, at the opposite end of his life, near his death, he is again referred to as the King of the Jews by others who are not actually seeking to worship him. It is interesting, I find it interesting that non-Jewish persons use the title King of the Jews to describe Jesus, underscoring the truth that he did come to his own, and yet his own people did not recognize him. It is also in the Gospels that demons recognized Jesus before his own people did. This particular observance of Christ the King, which we are participating in today, was instituted initially due to events that were happening not in the 1st century CE, but in the years following the Great War in Europe. There, in between World War I and World War II, there was a rise of fascism, Italy, communism, Russia, and social upheaval throughout the world. There was rampant inflation, and the idea of colonialism was at its worst during those years. The seeds of evil that would eventually grow into the Holocaust were planted at this time. The seeds of evil that would eventually lead to World War II, planted at this very time. The Pope in Rome established this feast day of Christ the King in response to these events. It is a day when we can remember that Christ is the King of our lives and that we can expect him to return to claim his kingdom. It is said in the book of Judges to describe their time. There was no king in Israel, so everybody did what they thought was right. We remember today how, in response to that, God raised up for Israel judges to administer justice and to arbitrate fairness between the people. Just as the people of Israel were then, so do we find people in the years following the Great War. So therefore, the Pope in Rome, in order to reassert the sovereignty of Christ and the church over all forms of government, and to remind Christians of the fidelity and loyalty that they owed to Jesus, and as a reminder to the totalitarian governments of Mussolini and Hitler and Stalin, that Jesus Christ is the only truly sovereign king. Jesus is a king with a saving and liberating mission, freeing us from all types of bondage. During the trial of Jesus, Pilate had asked Jesus, as you just heard, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered, "It is as you say." But later, Jesus does expand on the idea of his being a king. He says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest. But now my kingdom is from another place." Pilate turned to the crowd and asked, "Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" And in no uncertain terms, the crowd shouts their answer, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." This Barabbas that they were calling for was a convicted murderer and insurrectionist. So Pilate takes Jesus away and let his soldiers give him another beating. And it's during this in which they mock Jesus. And they kneel in front of him and say, "Hail, King of the Jews." I don't know whether this is true or not, but there was a story that a great hero of mine, personally, Bishop Fulton Sheen, used to tell people that at this very point, when the soldiers were mocking Jesus, when you think about this, think about all those secret sins that you have committed that you think God doesn't know about. This is what that is about, that you pay false homage to the Lord Christ. Just something to trouble you in your prayers. So they trot Jesus back out, and "Here is your king. What shall I do with him? Take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," they shouted. The choice had been made, and Jesus, their true king, was led away to be crucified as a criminal. We remember, though, that this very crowd, members of this very crowd, had just days before, as Jesus arrived, coming to Jerusalem for his final time, were these same people hailing him as the king. "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." They're waving their palm branches. They are laying their cloaks in front of him. Jesus had even, it seems, to help this scene along somehow. Because if we remember that the prophet Zechariah says, Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king comes to you. He is just and endowed with salvation, humbled and riding on a donkey. Jesus makes his triumphal entry. As he is making a triumphal entry on one side of Jerusalem, another entry is being made from the Roman side. Jesus in direct opposition to the authority of Rome. You see, God's people have been expecting a deliverer ever since God had promised them that they would have one in the book of Genesis. God unifies the people under Moses and told them that if they followed and obeyed his rules, God would bless them. But at some point, the children of Israel rejects God as their leader. I said, we need a real king. We need somebody that we can send our money to. We can send our children to. We can pay our taxes to. And in time of war, we can go and die for. Because this is what they saw around them. They rejected God and asked for a flesh and blood king. God gave them Saul. He was a tall man. That was good. Saul is eventually, because of his disobedience to God, is rejected by God. His kids don't get to inherit the throne. And so God has to start all over again, or so it seems. And this is when God chooses David, a sheep herder, to be the next king. God makes a promise to David, we heard it in the psalm just now, that his name would be forever and ever associated with the throne of Israel. And so, when Jesus comes, Jesus actually does fulfill these promises. He does fulfill the messianic hopes of the people of Israel. Yet, even though he was from the royal line, even though he is the true king, his own people did not receive him. Okay, so this is the conclusion of the church's liturgical year. We're going to conclude it with the Feast of Christ the King. We've only had this remembrance of Jesus' officially since the Pope instituted this in 1925. It's not very long. This is what the Pope says about it. He says, the peace of Christ and the reign of Christ. Next Sunday, Advent. The entire church will turn expectantly to the birth of Christ, but also we should be reminded of our hope that Jesus will come again, that the King of glory, that the very person that the three wise men were seeking would be coming to us. And who is the King of glory? Jesus Christ, strong and mighty. He is our King of glory. In conclusion, I just want to wish you and your family a very happy and holy day. Amen.